The cold mountain air pressed down on the valley long before the sun crept above the ridges. The peaks of Afghanistan loomed jagged and silent, their shadows carving black scars across the rocky landscape. Deep inside a makeshift operations tent, 32 Navy SEALs huddled around a sand-colored briefing table covered in maps, satellite imagery, and intelligence reports. The flickering light of a hanging lantern cast sharp lines on their faces, young, weathered, determined. The mission was straightforward on paper, but everyone in the room understood what straightforward meant in reality. It would be messy, violent, and uncertain. The valley where they were headed was a known stronghold, a lifeline for insurgents moving weapons, fighters, and supplies across the border. For months, intelligence drones had picked up suspicious movement convoys, stockpiles, armed gatherings. Their orders tonight were to strike at the heart of it, cripple the enemy's network, and destabilize the chain of command operating from those mountains. The commanding officer, a broad-shouldered man with steel-gray eyes named Commander Blake, pointed to a red circle on the map. His voice was calm, deliberate. "This is the village. Satellite shows at least 40 to 50 hostiles on a normal day. But intel suggests reinforcements could come from these ridgelines here and here." He dragged his gloved finger along 2 mountain passes. "If we get pinned, these are our choke points. And gentlemen, if they cut us off in the valley, there's no easy way out." The SEALs listened intently, not a sound in the room except the occasional crackle of the radio equipment behind them. They had all done this before. Some had been through Fallujah, others through Ramadi. But Afghanistan was its own kind of war and enemy that didn't fight by rules. Terrain that swallowed even the most skilled units whole. Petty Officer Ramirez leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So we hit the stockpile, take out their comms, and get out before they can regroup?" "Exactly," Blake replied. "Fast and precise. In and out before dawn fully breaks. Air support will be on standby if we need it, but the terrain makes it tricky. If things get hot, we'll have to hold until close air support can get eyes on the valley." The men nodded, but every one of them silently acknowledged the unspoken truth. If things get hot was almost guaranteed. At the back of the tent, Lieutenant Mark Danner, the team's communications officer, adjusted his headset and chimed in. "Weather's clear tonight. No storms, low wind. If we stay on schedule, extraction birds will be waiting just outside the valley at 0500. But timing is everything. We missed the window. We're stuck until nightfall." That word stuck hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew what it meant. No cover, no resupply, and surrounded in a hostile valley where every villager could turn into an enemy fighter by sunrise. Blake's eyes scanned the room, settling on each man. This isn't just another hit and run. Intel says high-value targets could be on site. Leadership, the kind that plans IED ambushes against convoys. If we take them out, we cut the snake's head clean off. For a moment, silence filled the tent. Then Chief Warrant Officer Jacobs, the oldest of the team and a veteran of too many firefights, exhaled slowly. "If the intel's wrong, we'll be swimming in hornets." No one argued. They all knew how fragile intelligence could be in this war. A single wrong report could mean walking into an ambush designed to wipe them out. Still, orders were orders, and the SEALs weren't the kind to flinch from impossible odds. Blake closed the briefing with words that were both warning and motivation. "Stay sharp, trust each other, and remember speed and discipline are our lifelines. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we get out. 32 in, 32 out. That's the only acceptable outcome." The preparation began. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Magazines were stacked in neat rows, night vision goggles fitted, radios tested. Each man carried his own ritual one, rubbed a small coin his father had given him. Another scribbled quick notes in a pocket notebook. Another silently mouthed a prayer. These weren't signs of weakness. They were anchors, reminders of home, ways to steady the mind before stepping into hell. Ramirez grinned as he loaded his rifle, breaking the tension. Another midnight stroll in paradise, boys. Paradise with AKs and RPGs, someone muttered back, and the room chuckled briefly. The laughter was quick, forced, but necessary. By 0200 hours, the team was geared and ready. Outside, the rotors of the helicopters began to thunder, cutting through the cold night air. Dust swirled as the pilots revved their engines, the rhythmic pounding of blades echoing across the base. The SEALs moved toward the helos in single file, weapons slung, helmets low. The ride would be short but dangerous. The helicopters skimmed low across the mountains, weaving through dark valleys to avoid detection. The SEALs sat shoulder to shoulder inside, the red glow of the interior light washing over their faces. Some closed their eyes, saving energy. Others stared at the floor, rehearsing every move in their heads. Commander Blake sat near the door, headset on, eyes scanning the black horizon. He thought about the men under his command, how much trust they placed in him, how much trust he placed in them. He knew by dawn they'd be in the thick of it. And he also knew deep down that missions like this rarely went as clean as the map suggested. As the helos neared the drop zone, the valley began to open below them. From above, it looked calm, just a quiet stretch of rugged earth with scattered houses and fields. But Blake knew better. Beneath that calm exterior was an enemy waiting, watching, always preparing. 2 minutes out, the pilot called. The SEALs tightened their grips on their weapons. The air grew colder, sharper. The helicopters dropped lower, skimming over the riverbed before flaring into a landing zone, carved into the valley floor. The men spilled out quickly, forming a perimeter, weapons up. Within seconds, the helos lifted again, disappearing into the night, their sound fading until silence reclaimed the valley. And there they were, 32 men in hostile territory, standing in a shadowed valley that felt both vast and suffocating. The mountains loomed like walls on either side, the ridgeline stretching upward into darkness. Somewhere out there, eyes were watching. Commander Blake gave the signal, and the team moved forward, boots crunching softly against the dirt. Their night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green, every shadow a potential threat. They advanced in silence, weaving through the terrain toward their first objective, a suspected weapons cache hidden in an abandoned compound. The valley was quiet, too quiet. Even the distant howls of wild dogs seemed absent tonight. The silence wasn't peace, it was warning. One of the younger SEALs, Daniels, whispered into comms, "Feels like we're walking into a trap." Blake didn't reply. He simply raised his hand, signaling silence, and pressed onward. He couldn't shake the same feeling. The valley had that heavy, suffocating air soldiers. Learn to trust the kind that told you something was coming. By 0300 hours, they reached the compound. The first breach went smooth, too smooth. The cache was there. Crates of ammunition, RPG launchers, and small arms stacked neatly. Proof that intel had been right about enemy presence. But as explosives were planted to destroy the stockpile, Blake's instincts gnawed at him. If the enemy valued this cache, they'd protect it. And if they weren't here now, it only meant one thing: they were waiting. High above, on the ridges, pairs of eyes tracked every movement through battered binoculars. Radios clicked softly as enemy fighters relayed positions and waited for the signal. The SEALs were inside the valley. The trap was set. And as Blake looked out into the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was already against them. The valley slept under a canopy of stars, its silence broken only by the faint shuffle of boots and the muted clatter of gear. The SEALs moved in disciplined lines, shadows flowing like water through the terrain. Every step was deliberate, every pause calculated. They had done this countless times before. Slip into the darkness, strike fast, vanish before the enemy realized what hit them. But tonight, something in the air felt different. The silence was not peace, it was a held breath, the valley itself waiting for a trigger. Commander Blake scanned the ridgelines through his night vision goggles. They were too still. Normally, villages carried some trace of life, even in the dead of night dogs barking, faint lanterns glowing, whispers carried on the wind. Here, nothing. Not even the distant bleating of goats, or the echo of a shepherd's call. It was as though the valley had been emptied on purpose. Eyes open, Blake murmured over comms. This doesn't feel right. The SEALs reached the first compound, a crumbling stone structure tucked into the base of a cliff. Inside, they found what intel had promised. Weapons crates stacked floor to ceiling, Russian-marked ammo boxes, and RPG tubes leaning against the wall like firewood. It was a treasure trove for insurgents, the kind of stockpile that could fuel months of ambushes against coalition patrols. Charges set, Ramirez whispered, placing C4 along the crates. His gloved hands moved quickly but carefully, every motion muscle memory. 2 minutes to cook off. The men withdrew, spreading out into defensive positions as the countdown ticked in their heads. At 3:17 hours, the first explosion ripped through the night. Flames licked high into the air, lighting the valley in a brief orange flash before settling into a roaring inferno. The ground shuddered beneath their boots, and a cheer almost slipped from one operator's lips. That's when the first shot cracked. It echoed from the ridgeline, a single sniper round snapping past Blake's ear and sparking against a rock. For a split second, there was silence. Then the valley erupted. Machine gun fire poured from the cliffs, red and green tracers streaking down like meteors. RPGs hissed through the darkness, slamming into the earth with deafening blasts. The SEALs dove for cover, shouting into radios, returning fire with disciplined bursts. The calm of moments before shattered into chaos. They were waiting for us. Danner shouted, his voice half lost in the roar of gunfire. Blake cursed under his breath. The enemy hadn't abandoned the valley, they had set the perfect trap. The weapons cache had been bait, and the SEALs had walked straight into the kill zone. On the ridges above, dozens of insurgents fired from entrenched positions, their silhouettes darting in and out of rocky outcroppings. They had the high ground, the numbers, and the element of surprise. For every insurgent that fell, another took his place, pouring fire down onto the valley floor. Pinned behind a boulder, Ramirez popped up to fire 3 quick shots before ducking down again. "They've got us boxed in," he yelled. Rounds snapped inches above their heads, sending shards of rock splintering into their faces. The air filled with dust, smoke, and the acrid smell of cordite. Blake barked into his radio. "Call for air support, now." Danner was already on it, hunched low with the comms pack. His voice was steady, professional, but beneath it lay urgency. "Troops in contact. 32 men surrounded. Heavy fire from ridgelines. We need birds on station. Immediate danger close." The reply crackled back after a tense pause. "Copy. Air assets are inbound. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes. An eternity in a firefight like this." The SEALs fought hard, moving in coordinated pairs, laying suppressive fire while teammates shifted positions. They tried to push toward the riverbed, but enemy fire cut them off at every angle. Mortar shells began to drop, thudding into the earth and sending geysers of dirt skyward. The valley became a cage, its walls echoing with explosions. Daniels, the youngest operator, clutched his rifle tight, eyes wide beneath his NVGs. He had trained for years, drilled for every scenario. But nothing prepared him for the sheer volume of fire raining down. "We can't hold this," he shouted, voice cracking. "You will hold it," Jacobs growled, grabbing the young SEAL by the vest. "You hear me? We hold this line." Blake crawled to their position, his face streaked with sweat and dust. He knew Jacobs was right. Panic was death. Discipline was survival. But even he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. The enemy had them cornered, and unless the air support arrived sooner, the valley would become a mass grave. At 3:30 hours, an RPG slammed into a nearby outcrop, showering the SEALs with rock fragments. Ramirez staggered back, blood running down his cheek. Daniels dropped beside him, firing wildly at the ridgeline until Jacobs shoved his barrel down. Controlled fire. Make it count. Blake keyed his radio again. "Command, we're at risk of being overrun. Where are those birds?" The reply came, strained. "A-10s are en route. One pilot is damaged, but still airborne. Stand by. Stand by." The words felt like a cruel joke as gunfire chewed the ground around them. The SEALs dug in, returning fire with deadly precision. Each shot they fired was calculated, every burst intended to conserve precious ammunition. But even the most disciplined fighters couldn't change the math. 32 men against an enemy force at least triple their size, with high ground advantage. Blake glanced at his watch. Only 13 minutes had passed since the ambush began. It felt like hours. Above, the ridgeline glowed with muzzle flashes. The insurgents shouted in their own language, taunts carried on the wind between bursts of gunfire. They were confident, emboldened. To them, the SEALs were trapped prey, bleeding out slowly under relentless fire. But the SEALs were not prey. They were predators, cornered and furious. Jacobs laid down a long burst with his M240, suppressing a machine gun nest long enough for Ramirez to lob a grenade into it. The explosion silenced the position, buying a few precious seconds. Blake used the lull to reposition his men, dragging the wounded to cover and tightening their defensive ring. Still, every inch of the valley screamed danger. At 3:37 hours, Danner's radio crackled again. "Hawk is on station. Damaged bird, but she's ignoring orders and coming in hot." Blake didn't know who Hawk was. He didn't care. All that mattered was that someone, anyone, was willing to fly into this storm, and even the odds. "Tell her we're painted." Blake barked. "Danger close, I repeat, danger close. Bring the rain." The SEALs hunkered lower, ammunition dwindling, as the ridgelines erupted in fire. The valley felt smaller by the second, its walls closing in, death creeping closer with every bullet. Somewhere above the mountains, the faint roar of jet engines began to build. For the first time since the ambush began, hope flickered in the darkness. The valley burned. Smoke curled upward from the wreckage of destroyed weapons caches, mingling with the flashes of gunfire and the crack of exploding mortar. The SEALs were pinned flat to the earth, firing back in short, disciplined bursts, their movements mechanical yet desperate. Each man was running through calculations in his head: ammo left, wounds sustained, minutes until they were overrun. Commander Blake pressed his shoulder to a jagged rock, headset crackling against his ear. "Command, we are danger close." 32 men surrounded. "We need air support now." Static hissed, then a calm but strained voice answered. "Copy. Assets are in the area." "Stand by." Blake slammed his fist against the stone. "Stand by." They were bleeding out minute by minute, and Command wanted them to wait. Beside him, Danner hunched over the comms unit, antenna extended, voice steady despite the firestorm around him. "This is Reaper 1, troops in contact, grid coordinates sent. We are black on options. Any aircraft on station, acknowledge." For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then a female voice broke through the static, calm, but edged with intensity. "This is Hawk, A-10, 2 minutes out. Copy your position." The sound of her voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline. Blake leaned into the comms. "Hawk, this is Reaper 1. We are pinned in the valley, surrounded on all sides. You are cleared hot, repeat, cleared hot, danger close. Do you copy?" "I copy," she replied. "Be advised, aircraft is damaged. Hydraulics are shaky. Systems red across the board. Command is ordering me to RTB." Blake clenched his jaw. Damaged or not, she was their only chance. "If you leave, we die down here. That's 32 souls. Hawk, we need you." There was a pause, the kind of pause that seemed to stretch forever in combat. Gunfire cracked over their heads. An RPG streaked down into the dirt 20 yards away, sending shrapnel whistling through the air. Blake ducked, radio still pressed to his helmet. Finally, her voice came back, steady and resolute. "Hold tight, Reaper 1. I'm inbound. They'll court-martial me later. Right now, let's keep you alive." Far above the valley, Captain Andrea Hawk Martinez wrestled with the controls of her A-10 Thunderbolt. Warning lights flashed across her console, a chorus of angry red and orange. Hydraulic pressure low. Left wing trailing smoke. Flight control sluggish. Every system screamed at her to abort, to turn back, to survive. She ignored them all. Her gloved hands gripped the stick, her jaw set like iron. Below, she could hear the desperation in the SEALs' comms, the controlled chaos of trained warriors trying to hold against impossible odds. She pictured them 32 men cut off, backs against the wall, fighting for their lives. Her commander's voices echoed in her headset. "Abort the run, Hawk. Your bird can't take another hit." But she wasn't thinking about orders anymore. She was thinking about the men on the ground who didn't have wings to escape. She had one job, and she wasn't going to leave them behind. Back in the valley, the SEALs clung to cover. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Ramirez had taken shrapnel to his arm, but refused to leave his firing position. Jacobs was down on one knee behind the M240, his barrel glowing cherry red from constant fire. Daniel's hands trembled as he slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle, sweat pouring under his helmet. Blake crawled to Danner's side. "Give me her, ETA." Danner listened, then nodded. "She's 1 minute out." 1 minute, Blake muttered, almost to himself. A lifetime in combat. Above the mountains, Hawk's A-10 roared into position. The battered jet shook as she pushed it lower, engines straining, wings trembling under the stress. The night vision display lit up the valley ahead, muzzle flashes flickering across the ridgelines. The telltale streaks of RPG launches, the faint outlines of friendly positions pressed against the valley floor. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She lined up the targeting reticle, the familiar whine of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spooling up beneath her. A weapon designed for one purpose, to shred anything that dared threaten the ground troops. "Hawk on station," she said into the comms. "Mark your positions, Reaper 1. Blake grabbed his infrared strobe and raised it above the rock, flicking it on. A faint pulse of light blinked in the night sky, visible only to her sensors. "Copy, strobe acquired," Hawk confirmed. "Danger close runs coming in. Get your heads down." The SEALs flattened against the dirt. Every man held his breath. Then the night split open. The A-10 screamed in the valley, its engines howling, its nose tilting downward in a deadly dive. At less than 200 feet above the ground, Hawk squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared, a sound like thunder tearing the sky apart. 7 barrels spun, spitting out 30mm rounds at a rate of 3,900 per minute. Tracers rained down in fiery arcs, tearing into enemy positions along the ridgeline. Rocks shattered, bunkers collapsed, fighters were flung into the air as the ground itself seemed to explode. The SEALs felt the earth shake beneath them, the sound so loud it rattled their bones. To them, it was the sweetest sound in the world, the sound of survival. Ramirez lifted his head just long enough to watch the carnage unfold. Holy hell! She's a damn angel with wings. Blake pressed his helmet into the dirt, a grim smile forming despite the chaos. No, she's the devil to them. The insurgents panicked. They had expected trapped prey, not a wounded predator swooping from the sky. Machine gunners scrambled from their nests, only to be cut down in showers of dirt and fire. RPG teams tried to take aim, but each attempt was shredded before the launcher could fire. Still, the enemy wasn't done. From the far ridge, a second wave opened up, dozens of rifles spitting rounds into the night sky at the descending aircraft. Tracer fire stitched across the heavens, some striking her fuselage with dull thuds. Hawk gritted her teeth as the jet lurched under impact. Warning lights flared again, fuel pressure dropping, hydraulics bleeding. "Come on, girl," she muttered to the plane itself. "Hold together for me." She yanked the stick, pulled into a sharp climb, and circled wide for another run. On the ground, the SEALs regrouped in the brief lull. Blake shouted over the comms, "Ammo check." 1 mag left. Daniels yelled, 3 mags. Ramirez grunted, clutching his bleeding arm. Guns nearly cooked. Jacobs barked, slamming a fresh belt into the M240. Blake calculated quickly. Without her, they had maybe 10 minutes left. With her, maybe just maybe, they had a fighting chance. "Hawk," he called, "you're cleared for as many runs as you can give us. Paint the ridges, danger close all the way." Her voice came back, steady as ever. "Roger that, Reaper One. Let's make some noise." She dove again, the GAU-8 screaming fire into the valley. The ridges lit up in bursts of flame as insurgents scattered like ants under a magnifying glass. Each run cost her aircraft more integrity, but she didn't stop. Run after run, she shredded the high ground, giving the SEALs precious seconds to breathe, reload, reposition. From below, the men could only watch in awe as the battered A-10 defied death again and again, carving survival into the skies with every pass. For 32 SEALs trapped in hell, Andrea Hawk Martinez wasn't just a pilot. She was the line between life and death, and she had just chosen to cross it for them. The valley echoed with the sound of Hawk's cannon, a terrifying hymn of survival. The A-10's strafing runs had carved open the ridgelines, silencing nests of insurgents and giving the pinned SEALs moments to regroup. Dust hung in the air like a curtain, illuminated by the fiery arcs of tracers and the orange glow of explosions. To the SEALs below, Hawk was nothing short of salvation. But hundreds of miles away, inside a sterile operations center, filled with glowing monitors and buzzing radios, the mood was very different. Captain Martinez has ignored a direct order to RTB, a controller announced flatly, headset pressed tight. His words carried across the room, drawing the eyes of officers clustered around a central display. Live drone footage of the valley flickered across the screens, tiny figures exchanging fire, muzzle flashes bursting like fireflies, and the unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 weaving dangerously close to enemy fire. At the front of the room, Colonel Hensley's jaw tightened. He had commanded air wings long enough to recognize reckless flying when he saw it. She's flying a crippled bird into a hornet's nest. If she goes down, we lose the jet, the pilot, and the enemy gets a propaganda victory. She should have pulled out 10 minutes ago. But sir, another officer interjected, pointing to the live feed. Those SEALs won't make it without her. Look at that valley. They're outnumbered 3-1. If she leaves, it's a massacre. Hensley's expression hardened. It's not her decision to make. She's been ordered back. Disobeying, that is insubordination. The room fell silent for a beat, the weight of the word hanging heavy. Insubordination. In war, disobedience could shatter chains of command, erode discipline, and set dangerous precedents. But in that valley, 32 men were clinging to life by their fingernails. Hawk's cockpit rattled violently as she pulled up from another strafing run. Warning lights screamed across her console. HID press low. Fuel leak detected. Left flap failure. She silenced the alarms with the flick of a switch, her focus unbroken. Her radio crackled with a new voice, sharp, clipped, commanding. Hawk, this is Overwatch Command. Break off immediately. Repeat, you are ordered to disengage and RTB. You are risking the asset. Hawk clenched her teeth. Asset. That's what they called her A-10. A machine of steel and bolts. Worth millions of dollars. To Command, the jet was an asset. To her, the seals below were lives, flesh, blood, brothers in arms. Negative, Overwatch, she shot back. Reaper 1 is danger close. They're minutes from being overrun. I can't leave them. Captain Martinez, the voice replied sternly. You are in violation of direct orders. This isn't up for debate. Disengage now? She didn't answer. Instead, she banked hard left, lining up for another run. On the valley floor, Blake huddled behind cover, listening to Hawk's transmission. He could hear the clash of authority over the radio, the tug of war between survival and protocol. He pressed his push to talk. Overwatch, this is Reaper 1 actual. If Hawk leaves, we're done. 32 men will die in this valley. I'll take responsibility for her actions. There was no reply, just the hiss of static. Cowards, Jacobs muttered, feeding another belt into the M240, sitting behind screens while we bleed. Blake didn't disagree, but his focus remained on Hawk. He needed her in the fight, no matter what the brass decided. Back in the cockpit, sweat dripped down Hawk's temples, her grip unyielding. She thought about her training, the endless drills, the countless times commanders had drilled obedience into her bones. Follow the chain of command. Never deviate from protocol. Orders are survival. But tonight, the rules felt hollow. She could hear the fear in the SEALs' voices, the desperation buried beneath their professionalism. She pictured 32 families back home, wives waiting by the phone, children too young to understand where their fathers were. If she turned back now, she wasn't saving the asset. She was sentencing those men to death. She keyed her mic. Her voice was calm, but her words cut like steel. Overwatch, with respect, my mission is clear. Protect ground forces. Until Reaper 1 is out of danger, I am staying on station. There was silence on the line. Then a curt reply. You'll answer for this, Hawk. Copy, she said flatly, before pushing the throttle forward. The SEALs saw her silhouette reappear overhead, trailing smoke but diving straight into the storm. The GAU-8 thundered again, shredding another cluster of enemy fighters who had been closing in on their flank. The valley shook under the barrage, enemy fire faltering for precious seconds. Daniels, crouched low behind cover, looked up in awe. She's not leading us. Blake's voice came firm, steady, cutting through the chaos. Then we don't leave her either. Hold the line, boys. She's betting on us. We bet on her. In the operations center, the debate raged. Officers whispered about chain of command, precedent, and court-martial. Some shook their heads. Others quietly admired the courage it took to defy orders for what was right. Colonel Hensley slammed a fist on the table. If she makes it back, she's finished. No room in my command for a rogue pilot. Yet even he couldn't tear his eyes from the screen as Hawk's A-10 screamed across the valley, cannon blazing, holding back wave after wave. For all his talk of protocol, he knew one truth. Without her, 32 elite operators would be body bags by dawn. Minutes stretched into eternity. Hawk flew run after run, the jet groaning under punishment. Each pass brought fresh impacts tracer fire, sparking against her fuselage. Alarms wailing, systems failing one by one. She tuned it all out. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs on her HUD, and the voices of desperate men below. Finally, Blake's voice cut through comms, ragged but alive. "Hawk, you're giving us breathing room. Extraction birds are inbound. Hold a little longer." Her chest tightened with relief. They weren't out yet, but there was a chance now. "Copy that," she replied. "As long as I've got rounds left, you've got cover." Every SEAL on the ground knew what she had done, ignored orders, defied command, and risked her life for them. In that valley, those rules didn't matter. What mattered was that she had chosen them. And in war, that choice was everything. The valley was alive with fire. Every ridgeline spat tracers, every shadow concealed muzzle flashes, and the air itself trembled under the thunder of combat. 32 SEALs clung to their shrinking perimeter, ammunition running dry, lungs burning with smoke and grit. Above them, Captain Andrea "Hawk" Martinez angled her wounded A-10 into the storm. Her HUD blinked with warnings like an angry Christmas tree, but her eyes stayed locked on the battlefield below. She had made her choice. Orders be damned. If the SEALs were going to die, she would die with them. The insurgents, emboldened by their numbers, barely flinched as the battered Thunderbolt appeared overhead. They believed the jet to be vulnerable, a lumbering beast limping toward its final moments. RPG crews knelt in firing positions, waiting for their chance to bring it down. But Hawk had not survived countless missions by being predictable. She nosed the A-10 into a steep dive, the ground rushing up in her windscreen, the ridgelines filling her vision. At 200 feet, she pulled the trigger. The GU-8 Avenger cannon roared, unleashing a stream of depleted uranium rounds at nearly 70 rounds per second. The sound was less a gunshot than a primal growl, the very air vibrating under its fury. The impact was immediate. Enemy positions vanished in plumes of dirt and fire. The ridgeline that moments ago crackled with gunfire fell silent as bodies scattered and weapons were abandoned. Below, the SEALs raised their heads from cover, eyes wide. For a moment, even hardened warriors felt something unfamiliar on the battlefield. "Oh, Jesus Christ," Jacobs muttered, staring upward. "She's carving the mountain apart." Blake keyed his radio, voice steady despite the chaos. "Hawk, beautiful run. Bring it again. You've got targets East Ridge, 3 o'clock. "Copy that," Hawk replied, her voice clipped, professional, but with an edge of fire that betrayed her resolve. She pulled the Warthog around in a hard banking turn, the aircraft groaning under stress. Warning lights screamed again. HID-B system failure. Her stick grew heavy in her hands, sluggish to respond. She gritted her teeth and forced the jet into line, scanning the eastern slope. There they were massing again, dozens of fighters scrambling to regroup. Hawk lined them up in her sights, her finger hovering over the trigger. Not today, she thought. The cannon bellowed once more, the recoil shaking the entire airframe. The rounds slammed into the slope, shredding rocks and men alike. Ammunition boxes detonated, sending secondary explosions ripping through the insurgents' position. The SEALs roared from below, adrenaline surging. Their desperation was transforming into aggression. They returned fire with renewed vigor, pushing the line outward. Hawk's defiance wasn't just saving them, it was fueling them. But the insurgents were relentless. RPG trails streaked upward, hunting the thunderbolt. Hawk juked left, then rolled, the jet screaming in protest. One rocket passed so close it rattled her canopy, a blinding flash in her periphery. Missile! Missile! Blake shouted over comms. I see it, Hawk barked, wrenching the stick. Her heart slammed in her chest as she dropped altitude, skimming the valley floor so low the jet's belly nearly clipped treetops. The ground blurred beneath her. She could almost see the faces of the men she was fighting to protect. The RPG arced harmlessly into the cliffs above, exploding in a thunderous echo. Hawk exhaled hard, then yanked the A-10 back into the fight. From their foxholes, the SEALs watched her dance with death. They had trained alongside fighter pilots before, but nothing like this. No one flew an A-10 this recklessly, this close, this personal. She was flying as if the machine were an extension of her will, daring the enemy to try and touch her. Daniels slapped a fresh mag into his rifle, shouting above the chaos. She's bleeding for us. Don't waste it. Push. Blake seized the moment. On my command, we take the left flank. Hawk's giving us cover. Move like your lives depend on it, because they do. The SEALs surged forward, every movement shielded by Hawk's relentless strafing runs. Inside the cockpit, Hawk's body ached from the strain. Her arms burned from wrestling the stick. Her ears rang from the endless roar of cannon fire. But she refused to yield. Her father's voice echoed in memory, an old instructor, long gone but never forgotten. When it's darkest, that's when you show who you are. Anyone can follow orders in the light. The question is, what do you do in the dark? She smiled grimly. This was her answer. On her 7th pass, the A-10 shuddered violently. An RPG had detonated close, showering the fuselage with shrapnel. A warning light blared. Engine 2 failure. Smoke trailed from her right side, the turbine coughing as it struggled to stay alive. Hawk, you're hit. Blake's voice was urgent. Still flying, she replied, eyes locked on her next run. One engine's enough. Hawk, break off. Another voice crackled the detached, icy tone of Overwatch command. You're compromised. Do not sacrifice the jet. She ignored them. She rolled into another dive, her remaining engine screaming, her cockpit rattling as if the jet might tear apart. Below, she saw enemy reinforcements pouring into the valley mouth, threatening to cut off the SEAL's last chance of escape. Her jaw set. Not on my watch. She squeezed the trigger. The cannon spat death once more, tearing the enemy line to pieces. Vehicles exploded, fighters scattered, and the valley floor turned into a cauldron of fire and steel. Down below, Blake saw it all unfold. His men seized the opening, driving forward with everything they had. The enemy's momentum broke like a wave against rock. Blake keyed his radio, voice hoarse but full of conviction. Hawk, you're a damn angel in steel. Keep it coming. Copy that, Hawk answered, her tone calm, but her hands trembling from adrenaline. Minutes dragged into hours. Pass after pass, Hawk punished the valley, each run more dangerous than the last. Her jet was failing, piece-by-piece systems blinking out, fuel leaking, hydraulics nearly gone. But the SEALs were still alive, and that was all that mattered. On her 12th run, as her ammunition dwindled, she pulled up and looked down at the battlefield. What had been a death trap only hours before was now shifting in their favor. The SEALs were moving, pushing outward, carving a path to survival under her wings. Hope had returned to the valley, carried on the back of her defiance. And though she knew the cost waiting when she landed discipline, reprimand, maybe worse, Hawk Martinez felt no regret. She had broken orders, but she had done what mattered. Above the screams of alarms, above the thunder of her cannon, one truth rang louder than anything else. Sometimes, saving lives meant flying into hell and daring it to burn you. The valley had become a furnace. Smoke curled from burning vehicles and shattered bunkers. Dust choked the air, mixing with the metallic stench of spent rounds and blood. The insurgents had lost ground, but they weren't finished, not yet. From caves and ravines, they poured reinforcements, firing wildly in an attempt to overwhelm the SEALs before extraction could arrive. Above them, Hawk's A-10 staggered through the sky like a wounded predator. One engine sputtered, hydraulics bled pressure, and her console lit up like a dying heartbeat. Yet the battered Thunderbolt refused to fall. Hawk wiped sweat from her brow, her eyes scanning the HUD. She had maybe 20 minutes of fuel left, a sliver of ammunition, and one working engine that could quit at any moment. But her voice over comms was calm, steady, resolute. "Reaper 1, this is Hawk. I've still got you. Give me your hottest targets." Blake didn't hesitate. North Ridge, RPG teams regrouping. If they get a clean shot, we're cut off. They're your priority. "Copy," Hawk said. She nosed the A-10 down into another dive, pushing it lower than ever before. The ridgeline loomed in her canopy, muzzle flashes peppering the slope like sparks on a black canvas. Tracers reached up to claw her from the sky. The cannon thundered again, tearing through rock and flesh. Fighters vanished in geysers of dirt, the rockets detonating in fireballs. But the insurgents were learning tracking her patterns, timing their shots. A burst of heavy machine gun fire hammered her fuselage, bullets ripping through the already mangled skin of her aircraft. The jet lurched, alarms blaring. Hawk gritted her teeth, forcing control back into her hands. "Still with you," she hissed, more to herself than anyone else. On the ground, Daniels ducked as dirt exploded around him. He lifted his rifle to fire, but then Hawk's strafing run ripped across the ridge above, silencing the enemy position. "Holy hell," Daniels muttered, breathless. "She's flying like she's invincible." Jacob spat into the dirt, shaking his head. "She's not invincible. She's just too damn stubborn to quit." Blake glanced skyward, admiration burning through his exhaustion. Every pass she made gave them another chance to fight, another second to live. He knew the truth. Hawk wasn't just keeping them alive, she was inspiring them. Back in the cockpit, Hawk felt the jet's fatigue in her bones. Every maneuver was harder than the last, the stick sluggish, the airframe groaning like an old warrior, refusing to bow. Her remaining engine coughed, coughing smoke that trailed behind like a wounded beast marking its path. She pushed lower still. At treetop level now, she screamed through the valley, skimming the riverbed so close the water rippled from her wake. Gunfire from the ridges tracked her, tracers zipping past like fiery needles. "Hawk, you're too low," Blake shouted. "Too low for them to hit me clean," she shot back. "Trust me, I've got this." And then she pulled the trigger again. The cannon's growl shook the valley floor. Entire clusters of fighters were erased in a storm of rounds, their bodies hurled against rocks as dust plumed skyward. Hawk pulled up just in time to avoid slamming into the slope, the G forces crushing her into her seat. Her chest burned, her arms ached, but her resolve was unbroken. In the operations center, Colonel Hensley watched the live feed with disbelief. "She's flying at ground level with one engine and failing hydraulics. Jesus, she's going to kill herself." A junior officer spoke quietly. "Sir, she's the only reason those SEALs are still alive." Hensley scowled, but didn't respond. He couldn't deny it. Against every rule, every regulation, Hawk was rewriting the mission in real time. The insurgents, furious and desperate, turned everything they had skyward. Dozens of rifles, RPGs, and heavy machine guns unleashed at once. The sky lit up with fire. Hawk dove through it, weaving like a phantom. One RPG exploded so close, the shockwave rattled her teeth. Shrapnel clanged against the fuselage, tearing another gash in her already wounded bird. Alarms blared. Fuel leak severe. Hydraulics critical. Engine temp redline. She silenced the warnings with a flick, her focus unbroken. Not yet, she whispered to her jet. Hold together just a little longer. She banked hard, lined up the ridge, and unleashed hell again. Below, Blake seized the moment. Move. Push the line. She's giving us cover. The SEALs surged forward, bullets cracking past their ears as they charged under the umbrella of Hawk's fire. One by one, enemy strongholds fell, silenced by the relentless rhythm of cannon fire and SEAL grit. Every man knew it. They were alive because of her. Hawk pulled up from another strafing run, her vision blurring with exhaustion. Her hands trembled on the stick, her body screaming for rest. But she refused to stop. Her father's words echoed again. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. She smiled grimly, blood on her lip from biting down too hard. Well, Dad, I'm terrified. But I'm not done. Her ammo counter blinked. Low rounds remaining. Only a handful of bursts left. She keyed her mic. Reaper 1, I'm running dry. Make every move count. I'll cover until I'm black. Blake's voice came back steady, filled with respect. Hawk, you've already given us more than we could have asked for. Just stay with us until the birds arrive. Always, she said, voice calm, steady, and unshakable. For the next 10 minutes, she wrung every ounce of life from her A-10. Each pass was lower than the last. Each burst of cannon fire more precise, more desperate. Her jet screamed in agony, but Hawk flew it like a maestro conducting a symphony of destruction. And below, 32 SEALs fought with the fire of men who refused to die, because one woman in the sky had refused to abandon them. As the horizon bled orange with the setting sun, the valley fell into a grim silence. Smoke billowed from shattered positions. Bodies littered the ridges, and the enemy's fire had dwindled to sporadic, panicked bursts. Hawk's A-10 circled above, trailing black smoke, battered but unbroken. Her ammo counter finally hit 0. She exhaled slowly, relief and exhaustion crashing over her. On the ground, Blake looked up, eyes locking on the silhouette above. She's out of ammo, Daniels muttered. Doesn't matter, Blake replied quietly. She's still here, and that's enough. The valley was a graveyard of smoke and fire. The once echoing chants of the insurgents had fallen into a fractured silence, broken only by the crackle of flames and the occasional desperate burst of small arms fire. The ground was littered with abandoned rifles and shattered mortar tubes, proof of the beating Captain Andrea Hawk Martinez had delivered from the sky. But the SEALs knew it wasn't over. Silence in war was rarely peace. It was the stillness before the storm. Blake crouched behind a ruined wall, scanning the ridgeline through his binoculars. His men were exhausted, bleeding, and down to their last magazines. Hawk's runs had bought them time, but time was slipping through their fingers. Then his radio crackled. A voice, steady and familiar. Reaper 1, this is Hawk. Extraction birds are 5 mics out. I'm dry on ammo, but I've still got eyes. I'll guide them in. Blake's chest tightened with relief. They weren't out yet, but there was light at the end of this hell. Copy that, Hawk? We'll move to the pickup zone. He turned to his men. 5 minutes. That's all we've got to hold. We break through now, or we don't walk out at all. The SEALs rallied, exhaustion pushed aside by the adrenaline of survival. Jacobs hefted the M240, his hands raw and blistered. Daniels reloaded his last magazine, jaw tight. 32 men, bloodied and bruised, but still standing. "Let's move," Blake barked. They surged forward, keeping low, leapfrogging cover to cover. The valley floor was a maze of destruction, but the enemy wasn't finished. Fighters appeared on the eastern ridge, firing down in desperation, determined to trap them before escape. "Contact east," Daniels shouted, dropping to a knee and returning fire. The SEALs engaged, precision bursts cutting down targets. But for every fighter that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. Ammunition dwindled, their pace slowed, and for a heartbeat, Blake felt the weight of inevitability pressing down again. Then Hawk's voice came over the net. "Reaper 1, I've got eyes on your east flank. Guiding you through. Push left, 200 meters. There's cover and a clear path to the LZ." Blake trusted her instantly. "Copy, Hawk, moving now." Overhead, Hawk circled her battered A-10, smoke trailing from her fuselage. She scanned the valley, eyes tracking enemy movement. With no ammo left, she couldn't strike, but she could still fight. She keyed her mic to the incoming helicopters. "Valkyrie flight, this is Hawk. LZ is hot. I'll mark the approach and guide you in. Stay tight, follow my lead." "Copy that, Hawk," the lead pilot replied. "We've got your 6. On the ground, the SEALs broke left as Hawk directed. They moved like shadows despite their exhaustion, rifles barking in controlled bursts. Enemy fire raked the dirt around them, but Hawk's steady voice over comms kept them moving. 2 tangos ahead by the boulder. "Take them down." Blake raised his rifle, squeezed the trigger, and watched the targets drop. "Clear, move." It was as if Hawk's eyes were their own every enemy. She called out "fell" before they could set up a shot. The enemy, realizing their prey was slipping away, made a desperate push. Dozens of fighters poured from a cave mouth on the northern ridge, shouting war cries as they charged. Jacobs cursed under his breath. "They're trying to cut us off." Blake's heart sank. The SEALs didn't have the ammunition to stop that many. Then Hawk's voice cut through again. Calm, steady, unyielding. "Reaper 1, hold position. I'm going to mark that cave." Her jet dipped low, almost skimming the ridgeline. With her last working system, she fired off a pair of flares, streaking bright magnesium fire across the sky and onto the cave's entrance. The signal burned like a beacon, visible for miles. Moments later, the first extraction helicopter thundered into view, rotors chopping the smoky air. Its door gunner opened up with a torrent of fire, raking the cave entrance. Fighters scattered, cut down in a hail of lead. The valley erupted in chaos again, but this time the chaos favored the SEALs. "Birds on station," Daniels shouted, hope flaring in his eyes. Blake keyed his radio. "Hawk, you're a miracle. Keep guiding them in." "Copy that, Reaper 1, Hawk said, voice strained but steady. "Stay alive. You're almost out." The helicopters descended toward the makeshift landing zone, their rotors kicking up walls of dust. The SEALs sprinted the final stretch, firing on the move, covering each other in perfect rhythm. One by one, they piled into the birds, dragging the wounded with them. Blood streaked their gear, exhaustion lined their faces, but they were alive. Blake was the last aboard, shoving Jacobs and Daniels in before him. As the helicopter lifted, he looked out at the valley, now a smoking scar of battle. And above it all, circling like a guardian angel, was Hawk's wounded A-10. Inside her cockpit, Hawk exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. She watched the helicopters lift clear of the valley, their silhouettes framed against the burning horizon. Relief coursed through her veins, heavier than exhaustion, stronger than fear. She keyed her mic one last time. "Reaper 1, this is Hawk. You're clear. You're going home." On the helicopter, Blake grabbed his radio. His voice was raw, choked with emotion. "Hawk, 32 men owe you their lives tonight. We'll never forget it." For a moment, Hawk was silent. Then she replied softly, "Just doing my job." But in her heart, she knew it was more than that. She had broken orders. She had defied command. She had risked her life in a jet that should have been grounded hours ago. And because of that choice, 32 warriors would see their families again. The A-10 groaned as she turned for home, smoke trailing behind her like the scars of the night. Hawk patted the console, whispering to the battered beast that had carried her through hell. "Good girl. We're not done yet." Far below, the valley smoldered in silence, littered with the wreckage of a battle that would be remembered not for its carnage, but for its defiance. The breakthrough had come not from orders, not from strategy, but from one pilot's refusal to give up. And for the SEALs, the legend of Hawk Martinez was born that night, carved into their memories with every cannon blast, every daring dive, every breath she had stolen back from death. The valley was quiet now. Smoke curled lazily from shattered ridgelines, mingling with the faint stench of spent cordite and scorched earth. The roar of battle had faded into echoes, leaving only the groans of the wounded and the distant hum of helicopters returning to base. Inside the lead bird, Commander Blake slumped against the bulkhead, eyes closed, chest heaving. 32 men had survived an impossible ambush, and all of them owed their lives to one pilot in a battered A-10. Daniels, still gripping his rifle, looked out at the smoking valley below. "I can't believe we made it," he murmured. Blood streaked his face, exhaustion written in every line of his body. She saved us." Jacobs nodded grimly. "Not just saved. She carried us through hell." Blake opened his eyes, his gaze distant. He couldn't shake the images, the red tracers cutting through the night, the rocket explosions shredding cliffs, and Hawk's A-10, wounded and smoking, screaming over the ridges as if daring death itself to take her. "She's more than a pilot," he muttered to himself. "She's a force of nature." Back at the airbase, the debriefing room was tense. Hawk had landed the A-10, wheels smoking, fuselage scarred from dozens of hits. The jet was a wreck-scratched, dented, systems barely functional, but it had carried her and 32 men through a battlefield designed to be a grave. Her commanding officers were waiting, faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Colonel Hensley, whose voice had been sharp and authoritative throughout, now looked as if he didn't know whether to reprimand her or salute her. "Captain Martinez," he began carefully, "you disobeyed a direct order, risked your life and the aircraft, and you saved 32 Navy SEALs from certain death." Hawk stood at attention, calm but weary. "Sir, I did what needed to be done. Orders or not, they were in danger. I couldn't leave them." Hensley's eyes narrowed, but there was a weight in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "You know the consequences of your actions?" "Yes, sir," she said simply. "And I accept them. But those men, they're alive. That's what matters." A silence fell over the room. Even the other officers, some of whom had spent the last hours arguing about protocol and chain of command, couldn't find words to challenge her. Meanwhile, the SEALs were back in debriefing, wounds tended, medals tucked into uniforms, and eyes still haunted by the firestorm of the valley. Blake stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, voice steady despite exhaustion. "You survived something no one should have," he said. "Every decision, every step, every shot you fired mattered. But there's one person we owe more than anyone else, Captain Andrea Martinez. Call sign Hawk." The room erupted in murmurs and nods. Daniels, his face still streaked with grime, whispered to Jacobs, "I never thought a single person could make that much difference." Jacobs nodded. "She didn't just make a difference. She gave us our lives back. Blake keyed the radio one last time. Hawk, if you're listening, thank you. There was a pause. Then her voice came, calm and tired. All in a day's work, Commander. Now go home. Days later, the official report hit the chain of command. Hawk Martinez was lauded for bravery, her actions classified as extreme heroism under fire. But the mention of disobeying orders was noted as well. Military protocol demanded it. A court-martial loomed, a procedural inevitability for anyone who defied direct command. Hawk didn't flinch. She had made her choice on that mountainside, over the Valley of Death as the SEALs had nicknamed it. Rules, regulations, bureaucratic chains, they were irrelevant when lives hung in the balance. At the hearing, she sat straight-backed, calm under scrutiny. Officers questioned her decisions, each word meticulously examined. But when she spoke, her words carried the weight of the lives she had saved. I disobeyed orders, she said plainly, because 32 men would have died if I hadn't. I took responsibility for that decision then, and I take responsibility now. My actions were guided not by rebellion, but by necessity. Every shot fired, every maneuver flown, was to ensure their survival. There was a pause, silence. The officers on the panel could not dispute the facts. Every life saved, every operator extracted, was a direct result of her choices. The decision was historic. Hawk would face no formal reprimand. Instead, her courage was recognized. Her name entered into the annals of military heroism. She had broken the rules, but she had preserved life, and in the crucible of combat, that was the ultimate metric. In the days and weeks following, Hawk's legend grew among those who had witnessed her bravery. The SEALs, forever indebted, told their story over debriefings, in barracks, and around tables at home. Her name was whispered with reverence. Hawk, the pilot who flew a crippled A-10 through hell to save 32 brothers in arms. Blake himself wrote letters of commendation. Each word carried gratitude, awe, and respect. She demonstrated what courage truly looks like, he wrote. Not blind obedience, not calculated risk, but the kind of bravery that chooses life over protocol, action over hesitation. A true hero. Hawk didn't seek the accolades. She returned to the skies, flying missions with the same precision, the same calm resolve she had always shown. But she carried with her the quiet knowledge that one night, in one valley, she had chosen to stand between death and 32 men, and she had not wavered. Years later, the story of Hawk Martinez would become part of military lore. New pilots were briefed on the actions of that night, not as an example of disobedience, but as a lesson in courage, initiative, and the weight of responsibility. Young aviators learned that sometimes the chain of command could be secondary to the call of conscience. In private, Hawk would recall that night not with pride or triumph, but with solemn reflection. She remembered the SEALs' exhausted faces, the roar of the cannon, the acrid smell of smoke and cordite, and the fear that had pulsed through her own veins. She remembered the quiet moment when, with ammo spent and systems failing, she had realized that she had won the battle, not just through firepower, but through resolve. And in that memory, she understood something profound. Courage was not a choice made in safety. Courage was the choice made in the dark, when the odds were impossible, when death loomed, and when you had the chance to save lives that depended entirely on you. Back in the SEAL teams, Blake, Jacobs, Daniels, and the rest would often gather years later to recount the ambush. Every retelling emphasized Hawk's name, her defiance, her skill, her relentless will to protect them. To them, she was more than a pilot. She was a symbol of what it meant to fight, not just with weapons, but with heart, intelligence, and fearless dedication. For Hawk Martinez, the night in the valley had been a crucible. It had tested her courage, her skill, and her faith in humanity. She had defied orders, risked her life, and in doing so, redefined what it meant to be a hero. And though the world would remember her as the pilot who saved 32 men from certain death, she knew the truth. Every life she had preserved carried with it a piece of her own soul, forever intertwined with theirs. In the end, the valley was more than a battlefield. It was a testament to courage, to defiance, to the human spirit. And in its silent shadows, the legend of Hawk Martinez would endure, soaring higher than any A-10 ever could.